Shalom, brothers and sisters. Welcome back. Today I want to talk about a damnable heresy of the New Testament. It's called Gnosticism. I got a little article here to familiarize, because I just think it's important to, it's part of, the Messianic history, the apostles and everybody, and beyond them, few centuries ahead. Here, let's give it a go here. Gnosticism, from the Greek word for knowledge, gnosis, was a religious philosophy that taught salvation was obtained through the possession of secret knowledge known only to the initiated. Here's the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia comments that Gnosticism was in fact a synchronistic mystery religion that blended together various elements of Jewish, Hellenistic, Babylonian, and Persian religions. That's under Gnosticism, the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia Electronic Database, BibleSoft Inc. While Christian Gnosticism not fully developed into distinct systems until the 2nd century, recent scholarship has concluded that the origin of Gnosticism is to be found on the fringes of pre-Christian Hellenized Judaism. Berger A. Pearson, after studying numerous Gnostic texts, discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, has concluded that the revolutionary attitude towards traditional Judaism, in combination with the massive utilization of Jewish traditions in these texts, can only be interpreted historically as expressing a movement of Jews away from their own traditions as part of a progress of religious self-redefinition. The Gnostics, at least in the earliest stages of the history of the Gnostic movement, were people who can aptly be designated as no longer Jews. Now, that's Pearson, Berger A., Gnosticism, Judaism, and Egyptian Christianity. That's a book from the Fortress Press, Minneapolis, 1990, on page 130. Okay, this revolutionary attitude toward normative Judaism is best reflected, writes Pearson, in the Jewish Gnostic rejection of the law of God and their contemptuous treatment of the biblical creator. That's on page 28 of his book here. Gnostic theology split the biblical God into a transcendent, unknown God whom the Gnostics worshipped, and a lower creator deity known as the demiurge. The demiurge was actually the God of the Old Testament and was portrayed in the Gnostics as a demonic, illegitimate being. That's also on page 28 of Pearson's book. As a consequence, the material creation, the matter itself, was viewed as evil. The commandments of God were viewed as bondage, and anyone obeying them was, in the Gnostic view, serving in fear and slavery. That's page 29. The belief that creation and matter were inherently evil led to extremes in behavior. On the one hand, some Gnostics believed perfection could be reached by punishing the body through penance, so that through the infliction of the pain and the mortification of the flesh, the region of pure spirit can be reached. On the other end of the spectrum was those Gnostics who practiced lawlessness. They believed that the immortal soul of man was completely separate from the fleshly body. Accordingly, the body may indulge in fleshly desires without any defilement of the spiritual aspect of man. Now, that sounds kind of familiar today in some of the Christian churches. That the earliest Gnostics were renegade Jews should come as no surprise to those who have studied the New Testament. The record of the New Testament reveals that the conflict between the early Christian church and false teachers who often espoused proto-Gnostic doctrine. These false teachers, in many instances, were either Jews or existed on the fringes of Jews. Here's an example. Simon the sorcerer, who came into contact with the apostles in Acts 8, was from Samaria, just north of Judea. His claim was to be a great power of God. Acts 8, verse 10. Represented the claim to be the bearer of divine revelation and illustrates the basically Gnostic feature of his teaching. That was from Edward Yeah, the New Testament environment. Losi goes on to write that Simeon Gnosticism clearly shows that ideas that developed on the periphery of Judaism significantly contributed to the emergence of Gnostic teaching. Walter Schmithius was persuasively argued that the opponents of Paul in Galatia, Philippi, Thessalonica, and Rome were Jewish Gnostics who were introducing Gnostic teaching into these Christian communities and perverting the true gospel message. That came out of the book in the Gnostics. The false teachers in Galatia were pushing circumcision onto the Galatian Christians, but a circumcision that was remolded under Gnostic speculation. Walter notes, citing Galatians 6:13, that the Gnostics teachers in Galatia, although circumcised, had renunciated the observance of God's laws and principle. The opponents of Paul in Philippi were also likely Jewish Gnostics while practicing circumcision. The false teachers in Philippi were described by the Apostle Paul as being evil workers and dogs. Such expressions, Walter writes, would never be used by Paul to describe law-observant Jews. Rather, the Jewish Gnostics in Philippi were libertines who had rejected the observance of the law. Walter also sees in Philippians 3, verse 10 through 15, Paul's rejection of the foundational dogma of Gnostic teaching, a denial of the resurrection from the dead. Paul again confronts teachers who denied the resurrection in Corinth. Pearson writes that the Great Resurrection, chapter 1 Corinthians 15, was meant to counter Paul's opponents who taught the immortality of the soul as a basis for their rejection of the resurrection of the body. Again, it should be noted that the false teachers in Corinth were identified by the Apostle Paul as being Hebrews and Israelites. You look that up in 2 Corinthians chapter 11:22. The false teaching of Gnostic penance was addressed by Apostle Paul in Colossians 2, verse 21 and 23, and again in 1. So again in 1 Timothy chapter 4:3, the antinomian Gnostic extreme was referenced among other places in 2 Timothy chapter 3, 5 through 6, Titus chapter 1, 16, 2 Peter 2, verse 12, and then 18, and the epistle of Jude. Some of the false teachers in Ephesus taught that the resurrection was already past, a key Gnostic teaching, 2 Timothy chapter 2, 18. Others were teaching fables and endless genealogies, 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 4. A reference into the allegorizing of the Old Testament that was popular with some first century Jewish philosophers. The allegorizing of Scripture was often joined with the teaching of the genealogies of eons, which is spiritual powers emanating from the Gnostic supreme God. It should also be noted that Paul's opponents in the pastoral epistles are described as those of the circumcision group. Titus chapter 1, verse 10, and as teaching Jewish myths and commandments of man. Titus 1, verse 14. The Apostle John also confronted Gnostic teaching in 3 epistles and in the book of Revelation. It is generally recognized that John's epistles were directed against the teaching of Cerinthius, a Jewish Gnostic from Alexandria, Egypt. Cerinthius denied the virgin birth of Yeshua and taught that he was the son of Joseph and Mary. At Yeshua's baptism, the Messiah descended upon Yeshua and allowed him to proclaim the unknown Father and perform miracles just prior to his crucifixion. The Messiah departed from Yeshua, and was only Yeshua who suffered and died while the Messiah remained impassible. So that's Ante-Nicene Fathers, Volume 1, chapter 26. So that is damnable heresy right there. The denial of the incarnation is a classic Gnostic teaching called docetism, from the Greek word dokio, to seem. Gnostics could not accept that God could ever have contact with evil matter. Consequently, the concept of the Word becoming flesh in the person of Yeshua Messiah, as clearly taught in the Gospel of John, was inconceivable to the Gnostic. The Apostle John described the denial of Yeshua coming in the flesh as a doctrine of the Antichrist. 1 John chapter 4, 2-3. He also confronted and rejected the antinomian Gnostic teaching that was being incompatible with true Christianity. The Apostle John also makes reference to Gnostic teachers when writing to the 7 churches of Asia. In 2 instances, he makes references to the synagogue of Satan, those who worshipped at those synagogues, as people who say they are Jews and are not, but do lie. Revelations chapter 2:8 and then chapter 3:9. Now, Ernest Martin writes that this was likely a reference to the false teaching of Samaritan Gnostics, who often claimed to be kinsmen to the Jews and who worshipped in the synagogues. Now you can find that in Ernest Martin's book, The People That History Forgot. Ask Publications in 1993. Them were paid. That's on page 42 and 41, 42. The results of modern research, which shows that Gnosticism formed on the periphery of Hellenistic Judaism and is consistent with the record of the New Testament. The New Testament reveals that false teachers, often described as either Jews or Samaritans, were introducing proto-Gnostic teachings into the Christian church in the first century. Despite the apostles' efforts to combat this dangerous heresy, history records that some aspects of Gnostic teaching remains to this day in many doctrines of modern Christianity. So yeah, I mean, I read that, reading that, and when you're hearing that, it does bring back a little bit of things about some of the denominations of the Christian churches, the traditional Christian churches. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I think, it just soaked right in. Some of those beliefs, Hellenistic beliefs, just soaked right into Christianity through the Mother Church, Catholic Church. Now here's another group I'm going to read. It's short, but it's the rise of Marcionism. The rise of Marcionism. It's how anti-Semitism and pagan philosophy corrupted the gospel. A 2nd century heretical movement, believed by some to be connected to Gnosticism, came to be known as the Marcionism, named for its founder, Marcion, a native from Pontus of Asia Minor. Marcion was born in about 80 AD and began developing aberrant theological views fairly early in his life. Later, partly due to the influence of the Roman Christian philosopher named Surdo, Masonian's view would become a fully developed system of belief. A council of elders in Rome excommunicated him in AD 144 on charges of heresy. Marcion, believing his system of belief represented a restoration of the true faith, formed his own movement. Marcion believed Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, was a just but inferior God, and that the Father of Jesus Christ, the God of the New Testament, was a good God. With these ideas at the foundation of his belief system, Marcion edited the scriptures, forming his own canon. He rejected the Old Testament entirely, threw it all out. The Gospels, except an edited form of Luke's, and accepted 10 of Paul's letters, throwing out the pastorals. The purpose of Marcion's revisions were to rid Scripture of Jewish corruptions. He believed his edited version of the Scripture canon was the key that unlocked the mystery of the true gospel. Now, that's bad news to tamper with Scriptures, taking out words and putting in words. It's not a good idea. Marcion believed, too, that much Jewish religion had been assimilated into the broader church's doctrine and practice. The good God of the New Testament, he believed, should not be confused with the inferior God of the Jews, nor should he be worshipping according to the Old Testament ordinances. Marcionism spread throughout the known world and became quite popular. Its popularity was due primarily to its anti-Judaism, which had already infected much of the Christianity and was widespread among pagans. Other factors contributing to its popularity were its solutions to alleged contradictions in the Gospels and its simple solution to the seemingly paradox between the existence of evil and belief in the good God. Many scholars believe Marcion was some measure influenced by Gnosticism. He rejected the material world and the flesh, believing them to be inherently evil. He forbade sex, marriage, drinking wine, and eating meat. Like the Gnostics, Marcion believed that Christ did not have a material body. While Marcionism is ultimately condemned by the broader church and stamped out, the very fact that such a bizarre belief system could be so well received among Christians illustrates how powerful an influence a sentiment or prejudice, in this case anti-Semitic attitudes, can be, and how such influence, if left unchecked, can lead to full-scale apostasy. So them words just sum it up. Them were just a couple articles that were I found interesting. I just wanted to share with you. Gnosticism, you want to say they're destroyed and they're gone, but some of the beliefs were trickled right into the Catholic Church, and then it went to their daughters, some of the Protestant churches of today, and they teach that stuff too. And thank God we have Scripture, to rely on. We got Scripture to rely on. And a little side note here, if you haven't, I don't know if you know this or not, but there is one group, Gnostic group, still in existence today in Iraq, and they're called the Mandeans. And they believe in ritual purification, baptisms with water and everything. And they get their roots from John the Baptist. The followers say they're the followers of John the Baptist, while saying that Yeshua was a backsliding heretic, traitor to the faith. But they have their own rituals. You can't marry into their religion, and the religion can't marry out into other people. They've survived through centuries, through the Muslims, through the Catholics. They survived through, and they're not a very big group, but they've survived, and they're in there. They have their own scriptures. Like I said, their own rituals. They bathe and they baptize all the time, and all reports is they're peaceful people. They just stay to themselves. But that's just a little interesting thing I wanted to share with you. But anyways, I just wanted to share those articles with you. Let me comment below. Let me know what you think about Gnosticism and whatever. Please like this channel, hit the notification bells, subscribe. Just share your views all you want, and share this video with everybody. And I thank you again. I thank you. Until we meet again, shalom, peace out.